Main Event Maniacs, presented by the Juice Box.
The main event can make or break a show. It doesn't matter how good the undercard is. If the main event is a stinker, the entire event can be tainted.
Here on Main Event Maniacs, we will revisit some of the most memorable main events in sports entertainment history, good and bad, across the various promotions and eras of professional wrestling. I'm Jay, and happy to be joined by the X to my D generation, good friend and co-host Brian. What's up, B?
Not much. Excited that they are bringing back the title Bad Blood to WWE. It was around, I don't think it was around very long, actually, to be honest. I remember there were a few Bad Blood pay-per-views. And then it just kind of disappeared. So kind of cool to see that they're bringing back some of these old pay-per-view names. So I think that's kind of cool. That's fun.
Yeah, exactly. And because they've got several storylines that fall into that category right now. You know, the whole bloodline versus Roman, head of the table, Cody. You've got, of course, Drew and Punk, who are just chewing each other's pieces every chance they get, and several others on the card as well. And, even in the women's division, you've got the whole fight over the soul of Dom and all the other things going on between Rhea and Liv. And, we're talking about this in 2024, but it's neat to go back to this one because, Brian, this was at a time when the battle lines were getting drawn, man, in terms of wrestling fandom, and I was square in the WCW camp. I mean, I'd watch Raw, with my buddies, but as far as like pay-per-views and stuff went, now if I'm spending money on something, it's going to be WCW at that time, and even in '97, still hanging on. And so I was not entirely aware of this one and its significance until many years later. And I think it might have even been you and I talking about it that had me look it up on the original WWE network before it went to Peacock. And, now we'll eventually port to Netflix and all that stuff. But I remember going through and finding this and watching it. And I had forgotten, like, oh, yes, this is where we introduce a very important character in the career of The Undertaker and also in this era of wrestling for WWE.
Well, and this was just the birth of that Attitude Era. All those different characters coming out. Generation X was just getting formed here. You had that going on. You had Bret Hart's situation going on with his contract in the WWE and all that stuff coming up. And this was really when things started to get more on that raunchy side for WWE.
Yeah.
And you had Pillman and Austin storyline that happened just earlier that year. And I mean, it's pretty
nuts.
crazy to think of what was going on at this time in the company itself. And then, then they had this. This was the very first introduction of a Hell in a Cell match that was supposedly, thought up of by The Undertaker so that he could get Shawn Michaels alone without any outside interference or anything like that. So pretty neat to kind of delve back into that era and just see what was going on.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so neat to watch this era of The Undertaker because he was so over and he was such a force, and even though he didn't have the belt at the time, he was just the shadow, just lingering in there because what are you going to do about Undertaker, And the way that they programmed him with Michaels and what they program out of this for him to give him things to do with it's a great example of professional wrestling booking without having to have a title necessarily involved all the time. And what they, because we're talking about Kane, that's who's going to be introduced. So, if you didn't know, the spoiler's hot. But bringing that up, for him and this whole long lost brother and all the things that they do with it, man. Like you say, it's when they'd gotten into the edgier kind of horror movie aspects of what his character was going to be. And I mean, man, Mark Calloway's just eating it up too, and he's in great shape here and just able to do so much stuff. And at that point, I mean, he'd been wrestling a good while too. But we'll catch everybody up on all the things, as we lead into it here, Brian. But man, I got to say, I am almost amazed it took them this long to come up with the idea of Hell in a Cell, like the idea of the impenetrable cage kind of thing. It almost feels like maybe they had this and they called it something else before.
Yeah, well, I think that's the reason it took so long is because Vince McMahon hates anything he never came up with, right? And this is very close to what we saw with, War Games in WCW or back in the NWA days. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it didn't happen before. Yeah. But the storyline that they were building kind of lended itself to this, and they didn't go full on war games with this, right?
No.
They did a one-on-one match, put a cap on the cage and whatnot. So I remember though back then that people were saying, oh, they're trying to do the war games, you know, with WWF and you know,
Well,
but it was, you know, similar but not quite.
Well, you're making a good point, though, is because I remember cage matches up to this point, and to me, WCW, NWA were the chain link cages, like what you see here, and the WWF's WWE cages were the big blue bar cages.
Yeah, right.
You know, and having a roof on it was a WCW, NWA thing, at least up into my memory and stuff. I don't think I remembered one where WWF had a top on it that you couldn't crawl out of, because that was part of the deal of the WWF is you could crawl over the top of it and drop down, and that guys would do spots off that all the time.
Yeah, no, and is this the first time that they didn't use the blue cage? I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I know Bret Hart had a cage match with Sid Vicious back in like February of this year for the title, and I'm trying to remember if that was the blue. I think that was still the blue cage back then. So this may be the first time that they actually had a cage match per se without the blue steel bars, and I don't think they went back to the blue steel bars after this point.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing them again. It seems like, I mean, one, I imagine this is a little more cost effective. One, and so let's never forget that. But it also is bigger and gives you more space to do stuff. And when you've got guys that are willing to go on top of it, I mean, as we know, Undertaker's involved in maybe the most famous spot from a Hell in a Cell match ever, throwing Mick Foley off the top of one.
Several of the most famous spots, believe it or not. But yeah,
well, it is his match. I mean,
And he didn't want to be known as that either. That's the funny part. Both him and Foley were like, yeah, we don't really want to be known as the Hell in the Cell guys, but they are. And
I mean, I hear you.
Both of those guys.
Maybe Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd at one time didn't want to be known for Back to the Future, but now they're like into it. So, it is what it is.
It is. That said, that blue cage, the wrestlers did not like that at all. I mean, that was hard blue steel, and there was no give to that.
You see why? Yeah,
going back to this cage, they're like, oh yeah, this
chain link will give you a little bit of. I mean, it still hurts. you can work with it. I always remember too. The gimmick on cages was: are they going to climb over the top? Or are they going to try to get like the gimmick of the lock and get it undone? And the guy will get it. Then he's get halfway out and drag back in.
I always wanted to see the good guy escape the easy way.
Right.
Because Hogan always went over the top. He was always going to go over the top and get to the bottom that way. Just once, I wanted to see the guy just be like, "Screw that! I'm going through the door."
I think the Hogan cage match I remember the most is the one with Big Boss Man on a Saturday Night's Main Event where Zeus hammer clapped his traps before. That back in the no holds barred days. But yeah,
good times. Before we get into this, I do want to mention too that. This pay-per-view actually coincides with the death of Brian Pillman, who the night before had flown into or had a match in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and didn't make his flight to get to the pay-per-view. They ended up calling the hotel, and that's when they found that he had passed away at that point. So that was a kind of a downer going into this show, and he was supposed to have a match with Goldust at the time. And the stipulation was on Terry Runnels, who was Marlena and Goldust's valet. And he had won her, I believe, in a previous match. And so she was kind of his slave, and Goldust was trying to rescue her type thing. And obviously that was dropped when this happened. But I did want to mention that, unfortunately, this also coincides with that date.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I think that's a good beginning here, Brian. Let's go ahead and do the build-up to this and talk about bad blood in your house.
All right. 1997 was an interesting year for the WWF and Shawn Michaels. After winning the WWF Championship from Sid Vicious at the Royal Rumble, Shawn would give his famous "I lost my smile" speech and vacate the WWF Championship. In February, there was a four-way match between Bret Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vader, and The Undertaker to decide the new championship. Bret Hart won the match, but the next night on Raw, Sid would regain the title in a steel cage match that we mentioned earlier. Sid would then drop the title to The Undertaker at WrestleMania. Michaels would return a few months after leaving and kickstart the personal feud with him and Bret Hart that we all know. Famous feud between those two, blood feud between those two that lasted.
How many
years.
Documentaries have been made about the ending of that feud? I mean,
well, yes, that too. But I mean, this was the start of Shawn just hating his guts, and it goes back to WrestleMania the year before, But this is where it like cranked up a notch, where they were just throwing insults at each other left and right. And you listen to them talk today, and like they both admit that they said, anything's fair game as far as things go, but don't go too far. And they went too far. Both of them went too far in this, and they ended up hating each other's guts. But anyway, we got that going on. This would then lead to Shawn Michaels being named the referee in the title match at SummerSlam between Bret Hart and The Undertaker, giving what looks like good advantage to The Undertaker in this match, as obviously Bret and Shawn hate each other's guts. But as the match comes to a close, Bret spits at Shawn, and Shawn takes a chair and goes to nail Bret Hart, only to hit The Undertaker instead. Bret quickly covers The Undertaker, and Shawn is forced to count the 1, 2, 3, giving Bret Hart the championship and pissing off The Undertaker in the process.
Yeah.
Michaels would then start a heel turn that would see him defeating the British Bulldog for the European Championship in Europe. That made a lot of people happy. Joining forces with Rick Rude, Triple H, and Chyna to form the D-Generation X group that we would know and love for years to come.
Man, the European Championship brings back memories, dude. It's like, where did that come from? Why do we have to have this belt? I guess, man, I don't know. It never felt like that big of a deal to me. I know it was maybe supposed to, but maybe it was in Europe. But not being European, I thought, who cares?
I think WWF at the time was trying to cash in on their overseas tours. At the time, they were going like twice a year, doing Europe-only pay-per-views in somewhere over there. And so I think this was kind of there to give their guys something to wrestle for that was prideful for them. But the title never really caught on, I don't think. Nobody really cared about it. And to take it off the British Bulldog and put it on, Michaels was purely for the heat, and it worked really well, right? Yeah. But yeah, that title, it lasted for a while, but I don't think anyone really cared about it.
I mean, didn't China have it at one time? I know Triple H had it a couple times. It just seemed like the thing now that WWE has both the Intercontinental and the U.S. titles. It was before they owned the U.S. title, having that other mid-Carter title to do something with it. And they didn't want to have a TV title because obviously that's ripped off ECW and WCW at this point, or NWA. So they weren't.
I mean, it gave them the opportunity to have a Grand Slam winner, right? I mean, without that title, they don't have 4 championships to win. Shawn becomes the first one to hold that honor. But either way, meanwhile, after winning the WWF Championship, Taker was involved in a long-term storyline with his former manager, Paul Bearer, who claimed to know where Undertaker's long-lost brother Kane was. Bearer claimed that Undertaker killed his family when he burned down their funeral home. Kane, however, was institutionalized by Paul until he was an adult.
Hold on. I mentioned earlier, it's like horror movie time and stuff. We're burning down funeral homes.
He's an Undertaker, so the family business is obviously a funeral home, right?
But I love that. I love this era of WWE because they're still playing with that idea, of these fantastical, almost comic book type, villains and heroes and stuff, but they give them these, I don't know, almost this twisted metal video game kind of background. I love this though because it's so much fun. It appeals to the core audience, and me at this point I was in college, so I mean I was outside of teenager, but young male. It's very grunt and cool and gory and weird, and horror movies at this point were. I mean, we were in the 90s, man. We were in the dumpster of horror movies. Scream had to rescue us in a few years, but everything was kind of falling apart. So when you have something kitschy like this, it is the kind of thing you would expect from horror at the time. It was cheesy and over the top, but it was also kind of brutal, and it fit the character. And what's funny about the Undertaker character is at this point, like he had gone from like the Wild West, almost Pale Rider type guy, to being like an actual just modern day Undertaker, but very spooky, very scary, 6'9", and huge as hell. I mean,
his character became more realistic.
From the comic book.
He was the comic book up until like 96.
Yeah.
And then his feud with Mankind kind of became more serious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you put him with Smiley Foley because you want to get him more serious, and obviously it works because Calloway's a heck of a worker. So
exactly. So Paul Bearer has Kane institutionalized while he's growing up, and as an adult, he's finally brought him out of that institution in order to get revenge on The Undertaker. But Taker claims that it was Kane who set the fire, not him. Taker would weave the story in and out a series of title defenses against Austin, Farouk, Vader, and then finally losing the title to Bret Hart at SummerSlam and kicking off a brutal series of attacks from Shawn Michaels on The Undertaker. So Shawn hits him with a chair by quote-unquote accident in the match, and then decides, I'm just going to keep attacking this guy, which seemed a little odd, but, Taker tried to get his revenge, but every time was foiled by the D-Generation, what would become D-Generation X members, and Shawn Michaels every time. Chair shot, chair shot, chair shot, which then leads to him saying, hey, we need to have a match. They have this match at Ground Zero, and it ends in a double countout, and then Taker says, you know what, I'm sick and tired of it being like 3-4 on 1. You and me in a cell with a cap on it. No one can get in. No one can get out. We're going to have this match, Hell in a Cell at Bad Blood, and here we are.
I mean, two things real quick just about the setup and the backstory there, Brian. There's two people that could sue the WWE, or the WWE could sue for infringement here, all right? First is Rob Zombie, because that's the total setup of Halloween 2007. So there's that. And also, George R.R. Martin should be sued again for this, because that's the Mountain and the Hound are the two brothers. I mean, I feel like he was maybe watching this when he was writing Game of Thrones, writing those characters out, because if you know anything about those two, they're very much a Kane and Undertaker, like this era Kane and Undertaker.
I mean, Kane and Undertaker is a story told from generation to generation. I mean, even using the name Kane brings back the biblical story of Cain and Abel, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's the idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
but having this other big guy that looks like the Undertaker, that uses his moves, but it's just the mirror reverse. I mean, you've done it 1,000 times, like you say, but it's a great idea, and it's a really good arc. But this idea of this other guy, this little toady who's out there just wreaking havoc. He's like this little gremlin just popping in and out of the Undertaker's life, and it's always him and his buddies, right? And that's what you want to see is, all right, fine. Me and you locked in a room together. Let's see what happens, and that's the idea of Hell in a Cell. And I love that setup.
Yeah, it's a great setup, and it was a good storyline for those two to go over, because Bret Hart, even though the obvious answer is Bret and Shawn in the long run, right? But Bret was busy with his anti-American gimmick that was going on, pro-Canadian gimmick, and they had him going with the reformation of the Hart Foundation, and dealing with the Patriot and his clan of American heroes against those guys. So they had that story going on that went into Canadian Stampede and other things too. So in the meantime, Shawn needs something to do, and why not let him take on this Undertaker guy? And it goes to say that at the time, Undertaker absolutely hated Shawn Michaels' guts. Like he thought he was the biggest prima donna, pompous asshole in the company. But he would say, but when you're in the ring with him, he's 100% professional most of the time, and you knew you're going to have a good match. Yeah. So that was the payoff. Don't like the guy, but working with him was great.
And what's wild is this is a precursor years before their duo of WrestleMania matches, which are some of the best that Taker had in his run.
Absolutely.
I mean, those are killer matches.
Yeah, well, and at that time, Shawn was a completely different person, and they were great friends at that time. But this is back in the days when nobody liked Shawn. He was a complete asshole. Ask Vader about Shawn sometime.
They all. It's another big momentous occasion though, because this is the last time we get Vince McMahon on commentary. This is when he starts transitioning to being the character Mr. McMahon and all that kind of stuff. But he's handing it over, as it were, and it's interesting to see him there still.
And it wasn't planned to be that way. What happens in Survivor Series really kind of dictated it to be that way. But you're right. This is the last pay-per-view in which Vince McMahon will be on commentary, which is really interesting. Yeah.
And if you watch the whole show, and we'll talk about it in a minute, he does back off more than normal. You can tell he's kind of handing it all off and stuff like that, which is interesting to see. So let's talk about the scene here, Brian. It's October 5th, 1997, like we said. The Kiel Center in St. Louis, Missouri, home of the NHL's St. Louis Blues. The attendance announced at 21,151. The Pro Wrestling Torch says paid number, a bit over 17,000. Still really good. That's over 212,000 in 1997 money, and 240,000 buys on pay-per-view. That's really solid in those days for a pay-per-view that's not a main PLE. I mean, this was just an in-between kind of event. This is when they started to experiment and do more and more of those, every year.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think back, and I remember I was with you. I'm a WCW guy, so I was always watching those. The big pay-per-views would come in right around 750 to a million buys if it was a really big pay-per-view. WrestleMania would get like a million plus buys. Starrcade might, depending on the card, bring in that. But otherwise, you were hovering between about 150 and 300,000 on pay-per-view buys. So your SummerSlams would probably get 350 to 400,000.
Yeah.
Your off shows like this one and your houses would get lower ones. This one did really respectable. Most of those in your houses, I think, were in the 150 range. Not many people really cared about them. Yeah. But this really brought a good number in for them. And I think it's funny to think about it this day and age, because if you look at pay-per-views now, if you get 100,000 pay-per-view buys, that's pretty big number. Now obviously WWE doesn't do pay-per-view anymore, but you look at your AEWs and your TNAs, if they're pulling in 100 150,000, that's huge for them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it is neat too, just like we signified, it's a big turning point in all the storylines. It's something that's grabbed people because people are interested in this idea of what's Paul Bearer talking about, what's going on with The Undertaker, and why is Shawn Michaels constantly terrorizing this guy? Does he not realize what's happening? Because not a lot of people know the backstory or the backstage stuff. So to see this and to see this idea of this straight up villain in The Undertaker be the quote good guy in the story is a turn. I mean, it's something the WWE is going to spend the next decade and a half, maybe even today, still leaning into the idea of the anti-hero being the almost face, heel face heel of the company.
Yeah, Undertaker probably was the first one. Austin hadn't quite got there yet. He was on the verge of becoming that. Yeah. The storyline would come in the next several months, especially after the SummerSlam match with Owen Hart where he broke his neck. Yeah. That's when people started getting on with him. I mean, they liked him, obviously. And the turn at WrestleMania 13 also helped kind of switch that as well. But Undertaker, I would say, was the first one who was that anti-hero type of character, and Austin was soon to follow.
Yeah, and Taker again just did such a good job of keeping that together. And like you mentioned, these in your house supercards ran primarily for WWF, WWE 1995, 1999. They revived the concept in 2020 for NXT, which I really liked, and doing that for that bunch. But this was them experimenting with, again, more PLEs, more big events, throughout the year that weren't just on free TV. And Bad Blood was the 18th of the In Your House events.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I know. I thought like, oh gosh, is that far into them? But when you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, about every other month they're popping one of these up.
They were the pay-per-views between the big shows.
Yeah, absolutely. They were a way to keep people interested in your television product while also giving you a chance to make revenue. In another way too, and give the boys another payoff, all that kind of stuff. I want to talk a minute about the undercard. I guess I'll call it that before we get into this. I don't know. Did you watch the whole show, Brian? Because I did twice.
I did not. So, WWF at the time was notorious for having really, really bad undercards and really, really good main events. Yes. When WCW had the excellent undercards and the crappy
terrible main events,
right? So, I mean, looking back at this era, I have a hard time watching a lot of those shows in full because the characters weren't good, the storylines weren't great, and the matches were just not awesome.
No, they weren't, and I'll tell you how they could have fixed it here. I just want to give you the undercard real quick and tell you what, in my opinion, they screwed up. So they opened this thing up with a handicap match. You've got D'Lo Brown, Kama Mustafa, Rocky Maivia. Remember Rock when he was just Rocky, the Nation of Domination? Took out the Legion of Doom, Animal and Hawk, by pinfall in a 12-minute meat slap fest. It's terrible. Max Mini and Nova defeated Mosaic and Tarantula by pinfall in what is called a tag team match in 6.5 minutes. If you don't remember any of those names, there's a reason, folks. There was a time when Vince McMahon was obsessed with little people wrestling as luchadors, and it's not good. It's as bad as you think it sounds like. It's humiliating and terrible for everyone involved. You had the Godwins with Uncle Cletus defeat the Headbangers by pinfall in a WWF tag team match. Talk about the absolute dregs that the tag division was in at this time, dude. It was bad, man. Like, we were wasting Legion of Doom on that opening match, and we had this crap as the title match.
Yeah, the Godwins, the Headbangers, even. Two teams that I thought were just awful, and they're fighting for the WWF tag title. Gross.
Yeah. Really bad, really bad. The middle of it, though, the Intercontinental Championship, they had done an Intercontinental tournament, all right? And here's what I think they screwed up. That tournament, at least part of it, should have been the undercard, at least part of the undercard for this, because they did the finals of it. Owen Hart defeated Farouk by pinfall, so good for Owen in 7 minutes. But I mean, and part of that is Brian Pillman had died, like we said, but Owen Hart had moved forward and everything. The lead up to it, though, the tournament was actually pretty good because it was Pillman, Dude Love, Owen Hart, Goldust, Farouk, Ken Shamrock, Ahmed Johnson, and Rocky. Maivia. So you had a good set of young stars and some vets in there too to make it fun. And I think they should have done more of that at this thing, because I know they had to blow it off the way they did, but it is just still not great. It wasn't a great match either. It's not. I mean, I love Ron Simmons, but not one of his best moments, and it's definitely not one of Owen's best. He's doing everything he can, but it was rough.
Yeah. And everyone knew at the time that Owen was going to win this, because the whole goal was to get Owen Austin again once Austin was cleared to wrestle.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But in an 8-man tag team match, Brian, the Disciples of the Apocalypse, 8-Ball, Chains, Crush, and Skull defeated Los Barricas. I'm probably saying that wrong. Jesus Castillo, Jose Estrada, Miguel Perez, All Jr., and Savio Vega by pinfall in a 10-minute match that didn't need to be 5 minutes, man. It's not a great showcase of the Immortals in that one, but...
Los Barricas was great. They were all huge stars in Mexico, but they just didn't. Savio Vega ended up getting over eventually, but the rest of them were just like, people just didn't care, which is too bad. I think in today's day, if those guys came around, they would be well received. Back then, people just didn't care.
Well, you talked about the way that the undercards of the WCW were always great at their PLEs and stuff, and they had a lot of luchador, a lot of Mexican wrestlers, and they got them over. They gave them
really good characters, yeah.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. They let them be great characters, Juventud Guerrera and all those guys. So.
And they let them perform in the ring, which I think made most of, who really cares about Viano 5, right? Nobody, but he can work in the ring, and when he has a match, it's good and fun and entertaining, right? Same, Rey Mysterio was given a push, and obviously Eddie Guerrero, those guys had the charisma to get themselves over as well. But you look at people like Juventud right away and Psychosis and all that, no character in those guys, but they performed like mad in the ring. Now Juvi would get character later on when Vince Russo came through, but before that he was a spot guy, but willing to put on really good matches.
I want everybody to mark that moment, by the way. Brian just complimented Vince Russo. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
I never said it was good character. I said he got character.
You're not wrong, though. This is one thing for being a spot guy. And Vince Russo hates spot guys, but he loved the lucha guys. He's something about it. He got on with those guys. I don't know what it was. Maybe they liked him and his whole trash TV thing. I know he calls it crash. It's actually trash TV thing. But he knew what to do with them. He got a lot of those guys over. I mean, for all of his foibles, he got a few things right, and they were part of what that was. So, then you had the flag match that lasted 23 minutes. Bret Hart and the British Bulldog defeated the Patriot and Vader. That'd been a really fun tag team match, Brian. Why do we have to have the flag step? I don't know.
Well, again, like I said before, it was Bret Hart and his anti-American thing, and then taking on the Patriot and his cronies, whoever it was, the flavor of the month, to team with him, and it was a way to kind of do that. I don't know that it was really necessary, but they had good wrestlers in this one, and it probably wasn't a bad match. I don't know how the Patriot was at the time. I know he ended up having a bunch of drug issues going on, and his performance went way down.
It's not a great match. Like it looks like on paper it would be good, but you watch it, at least in my opinion, I was just kind of like, everybody seems to be sort of just going through it, like, I don't know, there just wasn't a lot of energy to it. This card, oddly enough, was very low energy.
And I think a lot of that could have a lot to do with Pillman's death too. People just kind of dealing with that as well. I don't know how much that affected it, but I think that might have hung over a lot of these matches and kind of caused some of them not to be as good as they could have been. It could also just be really poor planning.
Yeah. I mean, it could be either or, but given the benefit of the doubt, we get to the actual main event, the thing we're here to talk about, this Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, Brian.
Yeah, and this was a breath of fresh air. But again, like we said, WWF was good at presenting really good main events. And they made the matches that everyone came to see count. And this is another one. And of course, you get Shawn Michaels coming out first and teasing the fact that he doesn't want the cage to come down. And, you got Triple H, Rick Rude, and Chyna out there with him, kind of to cheer him on. And
by the way, I had forgotten Rick Rude was part of DX for a little bit.
Yeah, at the beginning, he was kind of like their, I don't know, it's not really a manager, but the guy who kind of put them together, right?
Yeah, producer.
Yeah, he was there for quite a while until the one day he was on both shows at once and switched brands. That was good. And I think they were on at the same time, which is even better.
Exactly.
Really good stuff. And then of course you get the really long, boring Undertaker entrance. I hate the Undertaker's entrance. It made me not like him as a character. Honest to God, he and Triple H just know how to ruin everything by having a 600,000 second intro before getting to the ring, and it's like, oh, do we really need this?
I think at times the Taker entrance was fun and was enjoyable. I almost felt like there should have been versions of it. Like there's the super long one for like WrestleMania or SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, something like that. But for these kind of things, there needs to be the one dong. He walks down the ring with the music going, but he's walking at a pace. He's not dragging slow. All that stuff it doesn't fit every time. Like you say, it just drags the match on. And this match, like we should say, this is not that long of a match. And I swear a lot of it is just him walking the ring, and a lot of them walking around the ring too.
And they don't count that in the match time. But again, I'm with you, man. Give him really fun, cool entrances for big time events, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, whatever. But every single time, it's just like, oh my God. And this one took forever. It felt like it took forever. I don't know how long it actually was, but it felt like it took forever for him to get to the freaking ring, and then them have him lower the cage. It's like it takes away, I think, from the anticipation of the match.
Yeah, if the build-up takes
maybe if you're
long,
an Undertaker fan, you love it, but
no, I'll say even, and I like the Undertaker, but I'll say even to me, like the whole point of this is you're building up the tension that Shawn does not want to be locked in a cage with this maniac, right?
Yes.
But if you take so long, well, hell, he's just going to become comfortable because he's in there for 45 minutes. Like,
or he could just run away.
Yeah, that's also like the suspension.
The cage isn't down yet.
Like you could just leave. You're a heel. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And that brings up one of my questions about this is, and I know we need to get into the match, but I just want to ask from the outset, like, I know you wanted to do this, but oh man, I don't know. It just feels like it's not quite all there. Like the cake's not done baking before we pulled it out and put it on the display shelf.
Well, and I think it's the first one. Right, it's first time. You got to work out the kinks. You got to figure out what you can do and can't do. And I think they did actually a really good job with it. I think they could have done more with the cage. They didn't really use the cage a whole lot until the end of the match, I'd say. But you have this surrounding area. Throw each other into the cage more. Use that pain. That's the whole point of this match, is to inflict as much pain as you can on your opponent. Use it. And it didn't seem like they really used it a whole lot during the match itself.
No, I agree. They didn't. I mean, there's a few spots where they do, but not often. I mean, it's really about halfway through where you get into the fun stuff. I mean, a cameraman gets hurt, right? So the cell doors got to unlock, which is just an excuse to get the guys outside so they climb on top of it. Which is a twist though, because remember before in previous cage match rules, you go outside the door, it's over.
Oh yeah.
On this one, right? Like you got to knock the guy basically completely dead.
Yeah. Pinfall or submission, and that's it. No, I think as the match got going, I thought it was really good. You got Undertaker just beating the holy tar out of Michaels for a few minutes, and then Michaels comes back. We have weapons being used. It's fun, but again, I'd like to see more cage. I like the the fact that Michaels tried to climb up the cage, and they're
Yeah.
like, Sean, that's not going to do any good. There's a top on there. You can't get anywhere.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
a cool little call by the announce team and whatnot. But, you know, these two just beat the tar out of each other for a while. And one thing they did really well with the cameraman thing is that Michaels got annoyed with him multiple times before finally taking it out on him, right? The cameraman gets in the way, and Michaels is like, "Get out of my way! You're in my way!" Blah blah blah. You know, get out of here. They bleep out a few cuss words from Michaels on it, and then it happens again, and then that's when he loses his shit and just goes and hauls off and starts beating the tar out of this cameraman. I really want to know who that cameraman was. I tried to find it on the internet and couldn't find it anywhere. One guy's like, it was Flash Funk. That's not Flash Funk, guys. Sorry. That's definitely not him. But he was a wrestler. I'm just curious who it was and if they ended up turning into anything in the long run. But I thought that was a brilliant way to introduce the opening of the cell to have them get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the other way would be to plow through the cage somehow or whatever.
Right, which they probably hadn't gimmicked up and figured out how to do it.
Right.
Also, can't talk these guys into that yet. They may not be ready to do. I mean, they're going to do a pretty big spot here in a little bit, but that's not it. And so, everything they can do to kind of keep it controlled without losing control of it. And I agree. Once it gets going, there's some fun in here, and also it just reestablishes that. Just in case you were curious, Shawn Michaels is the heel. Because he's being a heel to just this working guy, you know, because everybody can be on the outside and be like, oh, I'm just doing my dang job, you know, and so he's being a jerk to him. But I love that, and I love that they get the fight on the outside, and you know, when he stomps Shawn Michaels' hands and he flies through the Spanish announce table, I'm like, okay, that's the spot that they agreed on, and actually worked pretty good.
It did, and what I liked about the whole series outside of the cage, the climb up, the fight on there. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a fear of heights. So watching people on a high thing like that and knowing anything can happen, and which we will see in the second Hell in a Cell, but in this one, like, he's back body dropping him on the cage. He's pile driving him on the cage. He's doing all sorts of things on the top of this cage, and you're just like, holy crap! What if that thing caves in? You know, what are they gonna do? And it's like watching that was just. For the first time was just like, oh my god, like what happens if they slip, you know, all sorts of different things. And this time they had those big bars in the middle holding the cage together. I mean, can you imagine falling on one of those?
No,
which she came close one time, I think, but
yeah, I mean, they clearly had choreographed it out a good bit, which I think was smart, because if they hadn't, they could have gotten real nasty. And had gotten could have been a little slow and weird, you know, and like obvious. But you see them both trying to steady their feet, and it's like, how could you fight on top of a tightrope? You know, it's almost James Bond villain stuff. And I like that part of it. You know, I remember in some of the video games at the time and stuff, if you know, that came in the years after when you had the Hell in a Cell, if you did it in just the right spot at just the right moment, you could get go through it, which became a gimmick and a spot to do, but they hadn't worked that out yet. And so, but it was in my head the whole time too, of going like, oh my gosh, are they going to fall through this thing? Like, it looks like at any minute it could just give way. And then when he goes off the side of it into that table, I'm like, man, that's a heck of a leap that he's taken through that thing.
Absolutely. And nobody had seen anything like that, right? Like, no. Holy crap. This guy gets like basically falls off the top of this cage. He's down a little ways, but brilliant spot. Looked just amazing and fantastic. And you're thinking, okay, this has got to be the end, right? Like, he's dead and through this table. And the match keeps going, and then we get what we were thinking here. The lights go out, and here comes Paul Bearer with this monster-looking guy in this all red and black suit and this face mask looking all nasty. And of course, McMahon's all like, that's gotta be Kane. That's gotta be Kane. You know,
Jerry, you're freaking out. Who's that? You know,
man.
Jerry Lawler did a great, like, Shaggy Scooby-Doo kind of thing in this era when he was a frightened, like, who could that be? You know, that's Paul Bearer there, but I mean, really, he's doing. I can't believe it. You know, he's getting all wigged out, and the crowd's really popping for it too. And when he rips the thing off the hinges, I'm like, oh, no, that was slick, because they locked the door back on him. But if you look, you see these guys starting to do stuff. They're pulling the pins, you know. And so it's so he can. I mean, it's still a feat, but he still has to pick it up and do it. And it's like, oh man, this dude's badder than all hell. You know? Yeah,
it looked great. It was great visual. I love when they get in the ring and the Taker is just staring at this this guy and looking at him like, it can't be you. That can't be, and they did a really good stare down, and they stared each other down for a good, 30, 40 seconds before anything happened. It was so good, so well done, and a great introduction for the character. At the time, I thought that mask was really cheesy, and it still is.
It is cheesy.
But
but it works, and
it works. Yeah.
The best part is him raising the lights by the fire, shooting them, because you didn't know what was gimmicked around the poles. All night, I'm going, what that is, and then the fire's up, and so I was like, oh, that's right, that's Kane. I didn't know he was doing this early, so I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, introduced right away. So you have this, and then Kane, of course, tombstones his brother Undertaker. And that leads to our finale here. But it's been so long since I've watched this match. I totally forgot that he came out through the entranceway. For some reason, I had it in my head that he came from under the ring and and whatnot. But it was.
I guess the only thing is they couldn't figure out how to hide something that big under the ring for this long a show. This show is long. It's way too long. And so to do that, and then after you put that cage down, there's no way to sneak him in there. I guess the keel already didn't have a good. It's got an ice ring under it, for goodness sakes. You're not coming up underneath it. So what are they gonna do? So I guess that was their answer to that. I thought the same too. I thought he just appeared somehow. But I guess they didn't work that part of it out.
Well, it worked though. It worked having him come down with Paul Bearer. You knew right away who it was, and you were now curious of what was going to happen. And I think they did a really good job with this spot. And then, of course, allowing Michaels to get the pinfall, which nobody thought was going to happen. Everyone thought the Undertaker was going to get his revenge and win this match. And
it's the upset,
it didn't happen. Yeah, it was an upset, and it was good. It was well done.
Yeah. I mean, again, the getting there, not so great at all. And even the first few minutes, it's like, but it's just every other match. But then it's like, oh, wait a minute. And then it's when they go outside, when that bit happens with the cameraman and they get outside, from that moment on through the end is really good. It's like you said, it's the thing that was the hallmark of the company at the time. Really lousy setups, but incredible third acts, incredible endings. They knew how to stick the landing at the end, because you walk out of the arena going, oh yeah, that was awesome, because what did I just see?
Yeah. Oh, and it's like we say in our intro, if the main event ends on a stinker, it ruins the whole card. Even though this card was crap to begin with, it ruins everything on this pay-per-view. But when they hit it out of the park, even if it's only for the last 10 minutes of a 30-minute match, that leaves a lasting impression. And this match was hailed as a 5-star match. Because of the last 10 minutes of this match.
Well, I'm going to use your analogy there, Brian. A 300-foot home run and a 427-foot home run count exactly the same. You just got to get it over the wall, and they got it just over the fence. So I'm with you. I have no rebooking for the main event. I think it's fine the way it is. Works great. It's actually a lot of fun to watch.
So what you're saying is a home run in Yankee Stadium is equal to a home run in Oakland?
Yeah,
it is.
One happens a lot more frequently than the other did, and especially now going forward, because there is no more Oakland as we say goodbye to the stadium. But no, you're right, and I think that's the neat thing about this. And then it left them some good places to go, man. We got the DX Heart Foundation, what I call the Blame Canada Hate Tour, coming up after this. And that led to the infamous Montreal Screwjob de Montreal, and all that jazz, which, changed the company forever.
Absolutely.
It changed a lot of careers, it really did. Kane got his debut match against Mankind at Survivor Series. That's a heck of a debut, and went over. And had various feuds. Of course, Taker and Michaels continued to circle around each other until Royal Rumble, and that was a great casket match, which we may have to talk about that one sometime too, just as an aside. But has a great ending. I won't spoil it here. If you haven't seen it in a while, folks, it's worth seeing. But it's a really good continuation, which led to Taker Kane at WrestleMania 14 ultimately, which is a really great WrestleMania.
Yeah, and that feud went on for over. Well, I mean, it went on for a long time, but the main feud went on for a year.
Yeah, they drug it out a long time back then.
They had some real interesting, the fire match and other things like that that they did were interesting concepts. Unfortunately, with the fire match, it was totally botched. But
yeah, well, most of those things, man. Have you ever seen one of those really work? I think we just remember the times it doesn't.
In Japan, they work.
Yeah, well, it's because they know what they're doing. Hell in a Cell matches, of course, always continued on, and then the PLE was even created in 2009, so it was its own thing built around that gimmick.
That was
now, I mean, look, yeah,
that was a bad decision. I mean,
yeah, it's too much. They're the same thing.
well,
right?
and having a pay-per-view named after a match just ruins the joy of the match, right? The match should only be used in certain situations, and if you're gonna call your pay-per-view a Hell in a Cell and guarantee that there's going to be one, now two Hell in a Cell matches, it just like, ugh.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's in 1997 when Shawn Michaels dove off of that cage through that table. It was like,
Yeah,
now that happens every Monday.
yeah,
That's
true.
And the guys are working, and the girls too. I'm not trying to bang on them. They're doing their stuff, but it's too much, man. It's like too much of a good thing. It ruins the mystique of it. It's not a big deal anymore if somebody flies through a table, because I think, shoot, at WrestleMania there's at least 5 or 6 that got busted. Like if the main table's still standing by the end, something went wrong. Did we forget something?
I do a predictions group for WWE and AEW pay-per-views, and one of the questions that's always on there is, will an announced table be broken? And the answer is always yes.
Always,
possibly multiple times.
Yeah, maybe both of them. Yeah,
every show it's gonna get broken somewhere.
Yeah, somebody's busting one up before it's all said and done.
Yeah, so I think that creation of that as a pay-per-view, or at the time pay-per-view, now PLE, was a bad move, and it sounds like Triple H has decided to get rid of those pay-per-views, which is a good thing. Money in the Bank used to be a staple of WrestleMania, right?
Yeah,
it was a big deal match. Now it's a pay-per-view, and it's like, what do you do?
It's really long ladder matches, which are cool, but they've lost their mystique,
their shine.
Yeah, I'm with. Hey, you know what? Pull some stuff back every now and then break it out again later when it's not such a big deal, and people, when they don't have it all the time.
Well, and I really hope that they do that with the CM Punk Drew McIntyre feud that they got going on. Someone's like, have the Hell in a Cell match, and he's like, why would you have a Hell in a Cell match as the first match between us? And they wanted it at SummerSlam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just stupid.
No.
That's a payoff match. So build it up, then bring it out. And that's what I like with the Hell in a Cell. It's like it needs to be something that's so needed to end a feud on a multitude of levels that's when you bring it out. It shouldn't happen every year. It shouldn't be a yearly occurrence, right? It should be one of those things like the next one should be next year or something like that,
Well, like you say, it's the payoff, right? It's got to be, there's no other way to settle it. We got to lock you two animals in this cage and let you go at each other. That was a cage match, right? With the idea, it's uncontainable, so we're going to contain it in this cage. You're going to watch these two lions just go at each other, right? And I'm with you. I mean, it should be the big blow off, but to have a whole pay-per-view built around it, I
don't like it. And I like how they did it back in this day. This is the first one. The next one would be Undertaker Mankind, again, after a long feud between the two. And this was the payoff match. And then you would see Mankind and Triple H in their blow off to their feud. It was done right back then. I would love to see that be done right again, just like this was, because that's what brings meaning to those matches, right? That's what you like to see. And unfortunately, we may be going that route. I hope we are, but we aren't there yet.
I think it's fun to go back and revisit where it started here with this one, because again, the build up to that feud had been great already, and even though the card on the show isn't grand at all really in this one, the payoff for it is, and it leads to so many great stories and so many fun things going forward that I'm definitely putting it over. I think this is one. I don't think you go back and watch the whole show. I did it because I'm sadistic, and I just wanted the context for it. Yeah, well, I needed the context for it, but I do think it's worth to go back, find this match, and watch it. It's definitely one to see. This is one of the better. And the thing is it's a payoff to something, but it's also not the end of it, and it's the lead into something else. So they're doing two things at once. We're finishing a storyline with Michaels and Undertaker while transitioning Michaels to Bret Hart, and then we're giving Undertaker this whole other monster to chase around with. So that's good storytelling.
It is. It was well done, and it was a fun match to see for the first time. And I love that we're going to bring it back with Undertaker again down the line. He brings it out again to do that. I think that was cool, and I think they had a hit with this. And if you look at the Hell in a Cell, it hasn't changed a whole lot since they first introduced it. They still follow the same type of rules. There's a little more obvious that we're going to get out of that cell some way, somehow, and someone's going to use that cell for the top and whatever else. But it's still a fun match when done right.
Yeah, when it's done right, it can work. And this is one of the times it was most definitely done right.
Absolutely.
You'll find this show, folks, on this very feed from time to time here on the Juice Box. Really appreciate Juice for letting us have this avenue, and for all of you interacting, telling us what you think of the show. We appreciate it. You can follow Juice on Twitter, X at Juicy Steen, on Instagram at Juicy Wrestling Closet. To also subscribe on YouTube at Juicy Steen. And this podcast is on Apple, we're on Spotify, Amazon Music, and please, if you can, swing by, leave a rating and review. I think you can now do that on Spotify and Apple, so do that. We thank you and really appreciate that support.
And if you want to follow Jay or I, you can do so on X. I am at Brian Thomas 878, and he is at JRan here. You can follow us on there. Send us questions on episodes. You can send us some suggestions if you want. We'll definitely take those into consideration.
Yeah, always fun talking this stuff with you, Brian. And folks, appreciate you being here on Main Event Maniacs. So for Brian, I'm Jay. And until next time, that's been your main event.
That was The Juice Box with Juice Springsteen. Make sure to subscribe to The Juice Box wherever you listen to podcasts.